We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 30th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
And we're here tonight in the heartland of our nation to celebrate the most successful first 100 days of any administration in the history of our country.
How is America responding to Trump's bold agenda? And what's at stake as his presidency moves forward? As the Vatican prepares for a new pope, we're asking how Francis's legacy will shape the upcoming conclave. Mark Carney's taking a firm stand against Trump in Canada, but with the G7 summit just weeks away, what does this mean for the country's role on the global stage? Saudi Arabia and Qatar step in to settle Syria's World Bank debt, a move that could reshape the country's future. What's behind this unprecedented act of regional cooperation? We'll have a roundup of climate news, a flick through the papers, and then...
It is a very good time in making films in Indonesia. It might be the golden time for Indonesian cinema.
We'll take you to Jakarta to hear about the thriving state of Indonesia's film industry. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. South Korea says hundreds of North Korean troops have died fighting for Russia in Ukraine in a deployment that's tightened ties between Pyongyang and Moscow. Pakistan warns India is preparing military action soon, and the UN is urging both sides to step back from the brink. And foreign ministers from the BRICS group of developing nations failed to agree on a joint communiqué yesterday, highlighting differences within the fast-growing diplomatic bloc. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, we're 100 days into Donald Trump's second term, and despite the controversies and protests, his agenda is moving forward with remarkable momentum. Journalist and columnist David Kaufman takes a closer look at the state of Trump's presidency and what the next 100 days might bring.
It's still mostly the best of times for Donald Trump as his second administration reaches the 100-day mark. Since returning to the White House on January 20th, the president has mostly delivered on the slash-and-burn agenda he laid out on his campaign trail. The U.S. southern border has been closed. Contentious DEI and gender ideology policies are being dismantled. And billions, if not trillions of dollars in governmental waste is slated to be accounted for. So what happens next? Most likely more of the same, albeit with even more intention, precision, and bombast. At the beginning of his first term, hundreds of thousands of protesters formed a viable and vocal resistance against Donald Trump. This time around, despite a late-hour protest surge this month, that resistance has mostly been silent, even as Trump's approval numbers slid in April, and even amidst the upheaval of the tariffs in recent months, his mandate remains rock solid. This means more pressure on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to concede territory, and it means an even more direct attitude towards Israel's neighbors and enemies, even if we may yet see a new nuclear deal between Iran and the U.S. and Israel. The Gaza crisis, meanwhile, will not be settled by midsummer, but Gazans themselves may be resettled in meaningful numbers if Trump enacts his plan to transfer Palestinians, at least those who want to, out of the embattled enclave. Back in the U.S., Trump's mass deportation strategy, though at times craven, if not cruel, has managed to skirt the limits of legality and is likely to continue and probably widen its net. Just this week, the president issued yet another immigration-related executive order, this time targeting the so-called sanctuary cities that have attempted to resist federal efforts to arrest undocumented migrants. Such increasingly punitive actions are almost certain to strengthen even further. Again, it's all about an undeterred sense of mandate. The murky business deals between the Trump family and the private sector are one thing assured to continue unabated for the next 100 days and beyond. Perhaps the greatest symbol of all of this is Trump's crypto operation, World Liberty Financial. It has secured more than $550 million in sales since the election season. Like Donald Trump himself, no one appears able or is willing to slow it down.
Well, that was the American journalist and columnist David Kaufman in New York. And I'm joined now by Charles Hecker, who's a political risk analyst and author of Zero Sum, The Arc of International Business in Russia. Charles, welcome back to the studio. Now, you've just been on this great tour promoting your book throughout the United States. So after listening to David's take on Trump's first 100 days, what's your sense of how the country's responding to his approach this time around? Is it business as usual, or are people reacting differently?
Georgina, good morning, and thank you. I mean, that's right. I've been in the United States for about 6 weeks, and I've been traveling in sort of business circles and social circles and also in political circles. And you know, the overall sensation in the United States is one of complete chaos. I made a number of trips to Washington, and everywhere else emanating from that chaos is an incredible sense of uncertainty. And I think, just like your columnist was saying at the very beginning of the broadcast, there is this sense that the guardrails are off, that you have President Trump acting without any grown-ups in the room, sitting at the resolution desk in the Oval Office, signing decree after decree after decree in the form of executive orders with that fat, thick Sharpie pen, and that the typical buffers that we have that stabilize the government, and that is the Congress, the courts, the opposition party, otherwise known as the Democrats. That Congress right now is largely decorative. The courts are about 50-50 in the way they're ruling on Trump's various executive orders. And the Democrats remain to this moment in a complete state of disarray since losing the November elections.
Are you getting a sense of any kind of active opposition?
Not really. There have been some protests in the streets, and those are an important expression of public opinion, but they are largely not impactful on what's genuinely going on in Washington. There has yet to be an individual, an organization, or a political party, and I do very much mean the Democrats here, that has coalesced, and brought together any sort of valid opposition. The only thing that the Democrats are doing right now that's interesting, and they're small one-off gestures, is they're having town hall meetings in Republican districts. And what they're doing is they're soaking up a lot of the public anger that's residing in those districts. What they do with that next, though, remains yet to be determined.
How much do you think Trump's rhetoric around national unity, and particularly his border policies, is resonating with voters in immigrant communities and in the more divided parts of the country?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a sort of sell-by date on a lot of Trump's rhetoric. Usually that goes down fairly well with the base. That's political red meat that people really do sort of gobble up. But there are so many other things that are actually impacting the way Trump voters, among everybody else, live on a daily basis. I mean, nobody in the United States anymore has a concrete idea about what things are going to cost in the future. We still don't know what the impacts of tariffs will be. The whiplash on his economic policy is absolutely dizzying. And that has a daily impact on the price of things that Americans buy and sell every day in their lives. And so the rhetoric will only take him so far, I think.
And given the expansion of his crypto operation, how do you think the public feels about the intersection of his business interests and his political agenda?
Yeah, I mean, there is a complete wiping away of the boundaries between politics and business and the personal and the professional, or the personal and the political, in the Oval Office. I mean, this starts to go, forgive me for this, but this starts to go a little bit over the head of the average voter, who, on the one hand, admires Trump as a successful businessman in spite of all of his frauds and failures in the past. But, the golden toilets still sort of resonate with the public. They see this crypto venture and are probably at the moment a bit blinded by all the bling and the gold. But the business ventures anchored out of the Oval Office and with the president as the figurehead are a very, very dangerous sign and symbol of the lack of separation between the political and the personal going forward.
I know that you spoke at a few universities, and of course we've seen Trump's attacks on Harvard, on Columbia and so on. How are people responding to that?
Yeah, very badly. So, if you are a student at one of these universities and you're not a citizen of the United States, you are extremely nervous on a regular basis about how long or what the terms and conditions are of your ability to stay in the United States. And if you are one of these universities that the president is attacking, your financial future and the future of the very vital medical and scientific research that you're carrying out that is funded by the government is very much at risk. And, it was while I was there that Harvard decided to draw a red line and say, we're not going to cave. We're going to push back. It's on a path of escalation with the government with an uncertain end. Harvard is convinced that it has the law on its side. But what we're learning is that doesn't always matter.
David spoke about Trump's direct approach to foreign policy, especially in terms of Israel and Palestine. What are people's reaction to this, particularly when it comes to the prospect of relocating Palestinians from Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, look, some of the sharpest rhetoric that Trump was delivering about Israel and Gaza at the very beginning of his term, talk about annexing Gaza and redeveloping into a coastal resort. Some of that has gone away. But, we still have, a busted ceasefire there and conflict flaring anew, and really no effort, it seems, or dialogue between Trump and Netanyahu at the moment to change the trajectory of the conflict there. American foreign policy in general is unmoored. We don't know who our enemies are anymore. We don't know who our allies are anymore. We seem to treat the former like the latter and vice versa. And, the very beginning of my trip was sort of marked by the ejection of Volodymyr Zelensky from the Oval Office, literally with lunch in the room next door going cold. This will go down as one of the ugliest moments in American diplomacy. And once you unhinge yourself like that, neither your allies nor your enemies are on solid ground anymore, and nobody's entirely certain what the U.S. position is on a number of foreign matters.
Anecdotally, then, are people that you know saying that they want to leave?
Yeah, this is a topic that you absolutely cannot avoid in social interactions, and that is that. We all know the story of the boiling frog, and everybody in the United States feels that the temperature in the pot is boiling. We're just not entirely sure how hot it is yet. There is a sort of a sense that we should be panicking. We're just not quite sure how much. Leaving is a big deal. The idea of actually upping sticks and leaving the country that you live and work or were born in is a massive decision. But the level of discomfort about staying is absolutely palpable.
Yeah, Charles, just very quickly before we go, you're pretty outspoken about Trump. Does that worry you about your prospects of getting back into your country?
It gives me a certain sense of relief that I actually have the passport when it comes to crossing the border. Once I get to the United States, it feels increasingly foreign.
Charles Hecker, thank you very much indeed. This is The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS, banking is our craft.
It's 8:13 in Rome, 7:13 here in London. The Vatican is preparing for a pivotal moment. A new conclave will soon begin, and while its outcome remains cloaked in secrecy, what's already clear is the influence Pope Francis has had in shaping it. Around 80% of the cardinals eligible to vote were appointed by him, a striking figure that raises questions about legacy, direction and continuity. So, what can we expect? What does history teach us about how conclaves unfold and where they by surprise. Dr. William Crozier, who's Duns Scotus Assistant Professor of Franciscan Studies at the Centre for Catholic Studies, University of Durham, joins us now to help make sense of it all. Billy, many thanks for coming on the show. This conclave is being widely framed as a kind of referendum on Francis. Is that a fair reading?
I'm not sure I would say it's a referendum. It's a point of renewal within the church. This happens periodically, whereby the church looks within itself and sees what it is that it needs to move forward. I think one of the things to say is that when it comes to papal conclaves, it's not about appointing a successor to the Pope that's just gone, but rather to St. Peter. So instead of thinking about papal conclaves as almost being like a linear process whereby one pope after another, it's more about the church seeking to return to the centre and re-engage with its identity. Of course, at one level, it is, there's this, famous saying that, a pope never lives to see his correction, which, of course, Pope Benedict XVI did, because we had Pope Francis being appointed while he was still alive. At one level, yes, there will be some way in which what we see over the next week really is an attempt to discern how the church should move forward from Pope Francis's papacy, what it should seek to take forward, and perhaps what it should seek to change.
So Francis appointed the overwhelming majority of the electors. To what extent do you think a pope can shape who comes next and what comes next?
That's $1 million question. I think a pope can shape his legacy by what he does when he's in office. It's much harder for a pope to shape his legacy in terms of the cardinals that he appoints, because the papacy doesn't work like a political institution in the sense that a political leader will appoint people to sort of the same mindset who will seek to carry on his or her work. When it comes to the papacy, the cardinals that popes appoint, it tends to be a case that they appoint people who are right for the job in the sense of the place where the cardinal is going to be based. So it's the case that for Pope Francis, he hasn't just appointed people to the College of Cardinals who are of the same mindset as him. Rather, what he's done in terms of what is truly unique about what he's done with the College of Cardinals is that he has gone to the peripheries of the church. So he's gone to places in the church, the global church, which have never had cardinals before. And at that level, he has shaped his legacy because he's given the College of Cardinals a truly global feel. But he hasn't stacked it. Hasn't stacked the College of Cardinals in such a way that there are more cardinals who are of his mindset and others who are against, not at all. So it really is an open book as to what can happen next.
I mean, as you say, that there are no obvious front runners. How unusual is that, and what does it mean for how things might unfold?
So when it comes to papal conclaves, there are some which tend to be sort of case whereby the frontrunner does indeed emerge as the, for want of a better word, the winner. So, for example, the 1963 conference, which elected Paul VI, conclave which elected Paul VI, he was expected to be elected to Pope by pretty much those who were in the know and sort of were observing what was going on in the church. Whereas if we look at the 2013 conclave that elected Pope Francis, it was a complete wild card. As he was then, Cardinal Bergoglio wasn't on the list of papabile, the people who are considered appointable to the papacy. So I think if I was to summarise it very simply, I think we should prepare to be surprised. We don't know what's going to come.
We know that there are several votes and happening sometimes across a few days. If the process stretches into a third day, what does that usually indicate? Is it gridlock, compromise, or just caution?
I think we need to see that in historical perspective. Conclaves have lasted as long as 3 years. In the Middle Ages, it was not unusual for a conclave to last 9-6 months or whatever. So, if it lasts 3 days, I don't think we should take that as a sign of, division or anything. I think the last two conclaves, the one in 2005 and the one in 2013, it was the second day when the white smoke went up, and I suspect it probably will be the same this time, possibly the third day.
Billy, thank you very much indeed. That was Dr. William Crozier, Duns Scotus at the Centre for Catholic Studies, University of Durham. Now, still to come on the programme.
We are over the shock of the American betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons. We have to look out for ourselves. And above all, we have to take care of each other.
How will Mark Carney lead Canada and the world? This is The Globalist. Let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Nina Dos Santos, who's an international broadcast correspondent and the former CNN Europe editor. Nina, welcome.
Thank you.
So let's start in Malta, where the FT is reporting about golden visas being ruled illegal.
Yes, you can imagine there are a few oligarchs choking over their coffee when they're reading this on the front page of the FT. Malta is one of those choice destinations for people who are looking to get access to the rest of the EU by essentially buying their way into a passport. 5,300 of these golden passports were issued just in 2023 alone, and the EU is getting extremely irritated by it. Now, the EU has already pressured other countries like Bulgaria and Cyprus to end their golden visa and golden passport schemes. They referred Malta to the European Court of Justice in 2023 over their golden passport scheme, and now we've had the ruling which says that essentially it is a transaction and countries should not be able to sell citizenship for the price of €600,000, donating 10,000 to charity and living there for 3 years.
And of course, the sort of background to this is that citizenship was being sold to Russian oligarchs.
That's it. What's changed here is the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. And, it's no surprise to see the fact that Cyprus, Bulgaria, these are countries that lots of Russian oligarchs had companies or the shell companies, for tax reasons. And as a result, also obtained citizenship of some of these countries, as I said before, as a way to get into the EU system. But unfortunately, lots of these types of individuals have been sanctioned. And as a result, countries like Malta, Cyprus and Bulgaria have come under pressure. Now, Malta's government says that at present what it's doing is looking at the ruling and seeing how it can adapt its laws to comply with this ruling. It can either face a severe fine and be forced to stop this visa scheme, but it's not quite clear how quickly they would have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've just been talking about the conclave, but of course now in 2025 things are a little bit different from the last time one was held, and I'm referring here specifically to tech. There's an Italian piece in the Corriere della Sera about a conclave in the digital age. How does it differ?
Oh, it's very, very different because, as we know, since the last time that we saw a papal conclave when Pope Francis was elected, 2013, so that was quite a while ago, we have since seen a ratcheting up of cyber attacks by state actors, in particular Russia, but not only China, which of course has a very awkward relationship with the Catholic Church, and North Korea as well. So there's lots of countries that would want to target this papal conclave on May the 7th. And Corriere della Sera is pointing out that the Vatican is having to really get up to speed with the times and create a digital bunker out of the Sistine Chapel as soon as possible. So how are they managing to do that? Well, apparently, according to Corriere della Sera, and this is really sort of James Bond, they're painting special coatings over the windows of the Sistine Chapel. They're also making sure that all communication lines between the cardinals are encrypted. The Vatican Apostolic Library is having its servers upgraded urgently, and there's going to be a new encrypted radio line for internal communications. The Vatican, it has to be pointed out, has come under cyber attack before during Pope Francis's time. It seems as though they've been criticised since then for not doing enough to make sure that their websites linked to the Vatican domains are are actually well protected. And in fact, there were 2 big cyber attacks, probably from Russia, officials think. One in 2022 upon the invasion of Ukraine when Pope Francis spoke out about it, and in 2024. So, we know that papal elections are incredibly charged moments, both from a religious point of view, but also politically as well. And there are many countries, notably, as I was saying before, Russia, that have tried to interfere in all sorts of national elections. So there's a reason why they may want to do so or try and spy on this one too.
Now, on the day of the Pope's funeral, Donald Trump did something quite clever, which was have this meeting with Vladimir Zelensky in a very dramatic surrounding, thereby ensuring that he knocked the Pope pretty much off the front pages in terms of photographs. That was a very striking picture. Now he says he'd be up for being Pope.
Yes. The world has gone slightly strange, hasn't it? When I see not just Donald Trump being doorstep saying, yeah, you know what, if I can fit it into my schedule, I quite wouldn't mind being Pope. I'm not entirely sure whether he's actually Catholic. But what was quite interesting was to see that this was picked up by the Trumpian stalwart, the Senator Lindsey Graham. And he said, actually, you know what? I think that would be a great idea. I would like the conclave to keep an open mind because, a US Pope and US President combination would truly be a dark horse, he said. And this reminded me of a conversation I had back in 2015, 2016, just ahead of the US election of Donald Trump the first time around, with Armando Iannucci, the famous screenplay writer of The Thick of It, the political comedy. And he said, look, I'm going to hang up my boots at this point because, satire just can't keep up with reality. And I thought, boy, he'll be looking at that Lindsey Graham tweet and laughing, or perhaps just, pulling his hair out.
It's hilarious. Let's talk about cash. Do you carry cash?
Rarely.
I mean, I can't remember the last time I touched a bank.
My son's tooth fell out yesterday, and I realised suddenly, with a pang of guilt with you asking me this, that I've forgotten to put the pound underneath his pillow as he wakes up as we speak.
Do they still believe in tooth fairies, children these days?
Well, I think the tooth fairy's been the victim of the cashless society. Clearly, even in my household, Jude,
But apparently cash is making a comeback. This is according to The Independent.
Yes, that's right. Well, MPs in the UK have, it has to be said, over successive recent governments, Conservative and now the Labour Party being in charge, have tried desperately to keep cash going. There's a lot of companies that will say they only accept digital payments, lots of retailers, and now MPs are, from both parties, trying to push for legislation to make sure that all retailers actually allow you to buy something in cash. This is actually quite interesting and quite important as a story, because there's a lot of elderly people who feel digitally disenfranchised. They want to pay in cash and often can't. And the other thing is that if you don't actually have a currency that people recognise and believe in, you're just taking away another layer of your democracy and your sovereign identity.
So interesting. You mentioned your son. I wonder if he plays an instrument. Are you tortured regularly by the recorder?
The guitar. And this is one of the stories that I noticed in the Times, which was, again, speaking to a trend that, is prevalent in the Dos Santos household. And not just cash, it's also music as well, that has become the victim of a changing society. My son has taken up the guitar. I have to say he's not terribly successful, but we won't tell him that. And the Times is reporting that there's been a plunge in the number of children who play the recorder at schools, and that they're turning instead to, whether it's the guitar or more often the ukulele. I think the success of the ukulele I would blame on the Minions franchise of movies, certainly in the case of our household. One interesting thing is that they're saying that despite the fact that the recorder has plunged because it's sort of more or less viewed as a very squeaky, irritating instrument to listen to your children play in at a school concert, the flute has made a comeback. So wind instruments aren't completely out, and that might have something to do with the fact that our Prime Minister is a famous flautist, isn't he?
Oh, that's
likes
true.
Playing the flute, doesn't he?
Yeah. Do we find ukuleles annoying?
Yeah, personally. I'd take my son's guitar any day over the ukulele, personally. But, I mean, there are other instruments that at least children are still continuing to play in British schools. But the reality is that, budgets are tight. We know that the education budget has been an issue for successive governments in terms of funding. And there's been a lot of tinkering around the seams on, the curriculum. And unfortunately, arts and music, as we well know, when times are tight, are the first victims of those types types of cuts. And I'm afraid the recorder has sort of had it, according to the Times, at least for now.
Thank God. Nina, thank you very much indeed. That's Nina dos Santos. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. South Korea's intelligence agency says around 600 North Korean soldiers have been killed while fighting for Russia in its war against Ukraine. Lawmakers in Seoul say North Korea has sent as many as 15,000 troops to support Russian forces, along with large amounts of ammunition and missiles. That support has reportedly helped Russia gain an advantage in the western Kursk region and brought Pyongyang and Moscow closer together. Pakistan says it has credible intelligence that India is planning military action soon. The warning comes as tensions rise between the two nuclear-armed neighbours following a deadly attack on tourists in Indian-controlled Kashmir. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has spoken separately with both countries, urging them to avoid a confrontation that could have tragic consequences. And foreign ministers from the BRICS group of developing nations failed to agree on a joint communiqué yesterday, highlighting differences within the fast-growing diplomatic bloc, while the chair, Brazil, issued a statement condemning trade protectionism. The expanded BRICS group, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, as well as new joiners Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, Indonesia and Iran, faces daunting challenges from US trade actions. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. After winning the Canadian election, Prime Minister Mark Carney has made it clear that Canada will only engage with the US on trade and security on their own terms. With the G7 summit just around the corner, Carney's positioning Canada as a leader in multilateralism. But as he takes centre stage, questions remain about how his rhetoric will align with actual policy and whether Canada is headed towards a national unity crisis. Aaron Burnett, Senior Fellow at the Democratic Strategy Initiative in Berlin, joins me now. Aaron, many thanks for coming on the show. Carney's hosting of the G7 summit almost immediately after his election is a significant moment. How do you see this opportunity shaping his global leadership and Canada's role in multilateral issues?
Well, I think, Georgina, it depends very much on how bold he's willing to be, particularly on a couple of key questions. I think one of those questions will definitely be, one of the things that I actually appeared on your program the last time about is how will he lead when it comes to supporting Ukraine when we are looking at a U.S. president who, of course, it will be at the G7 that is taken a recently dovish turn on Russia. Will Canada take a lead in seizing the $300 billion of frozen Russian central bank reserves, of which it has about $22 billion of itself, when Europeans have in the past been very reticent, and we're looking at a European sanctions vote at the end of July, which could see money returned to Putin if it fails. And Donald Trump isn't really necessarily expected to be willing to play a massive amount of ball there with his recent, pro-Putin turn. So that's one big question. But the other big question is how Carney will actually behave with Trump being there, himself, simply even being there. How will he lead the G7 or in his role as chair? Will it become a G6 versus 1 trying to do anything? Will he try to cut a more unambitious agenda in terms of, lowest common denominator, things that he thinks Trump can accept? Or, will we actually see some sort of showdown at the G7 that places Canada in one side with Europe on certain global multilateral issues and Donald Trump on the other? That will be a huge question going forward.
I mean, the Canadian Global Affairs Institute suggests that he might try and work collaboratively with Trump. Can he make that balancing act work?
I mean, that really is the big question. Carney just won a national campaign with some very aggressive rhetoric towards Trump. And on the other hand, they have said that they will speak soon. Trump actually, contrary to all of the rhetoric that seemed very successful in this Canadian election, Trump actually said or suggested that he preferred Carney win over Carney's conservative rival, Pierre Poilievre. That is a very interesting thing to hear. This really is the main question. We have Carney promising very tough rhetoric against Trump, talking very tough against Trump, but we haven't really necessarily seen Carney do a lot to actually put forth policy that would suggest that he really does intend to see Canada become more economically independent of the U.S. to be able to strengthen his negotiating hand. If we had seen Carney say, we are going to build an east-west energy corridor so that we can actually export certain resources, including LNG, to Europe, we are going to make it easier to approve critical mineral mines in Canada, which currently take about 12 to 15 years to come online. To be able to sell to alternative markets, maybe we would be looking at a more serious threat from Carney to Trump. But at the moment, I'm just not seeing it.
Now, Carney's stance on sovereignty and national interests is clear. We've heard very strong language. But could the political landscape within Canada create a national unity crisis? What role does his leadership play in managing or exacerbating those internal divisions?
When we're looking at the issues that I was speaking of before, certainly the natural resources, the oil and natural gas, the critical minerals, a lot of those resources are physically located out west, where I'm actually from. So in Alberta and Saskatchewan, to a lesser extent in British Columbia. And these provinces in particular broke heavily for the Conservatives. And Carney has said, is on record during the campaign saying that he doesn't consider east-west pipelines, which would benefit these provinces by allowing them to get their products to new markets and reduce their dependence on the U.S. market, that he doesn't see those projects as a priority. As a result, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith yesterday announced various reforms to how Alberta will conduct referendums. She has said that she will not be the one to place Alberta separation on the ballot, but she's lowered the number of signatures that would be necessary to actually bring a citizens' initiative on something like Alberta separation, to actually be seriously considered and even voted on within Alberta. She has said she intends to convene a next steps panel. The Premier of Saskatchewan has, joined her with similar announcements, saying that the last 10 years have constituted an open assault upon that part of the country and that part of the country's economy, and that there will be very aggressive steps taken to ensure that those provinces get a fair deal within Confederation. And if Carney does not actually respond to this, I think in a way that allows him to be a unifier, I think we are headed for a national unity crisis indeed, or a big risk of that.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. That's Aaron Burnett there. And this is The Globalist. Saudi Arabia and Qatar recently announced they'll repay Syria's outstanding debt to the World Bank, a decision that could pave the way for Syria to regain support and financing from the international institution. This bold move highlights a shift in regional cooperation and comes as Syria faces the monumental task of rebuilding after years of war. Well, joining us now to discuss the significance of this and its impact on Syria's future is Hannah Lucinda Smith, Monocle's Istanbul correspondent, who recently travelled to Syria for the latest issue of Monocle. Hannah, thank you very much for coming on the show. This decision to pay Syria's debt, it's a significant shift in the region. How do you think it will affect Syria's relationship with the World Bank and its ability to access international financing?
Yeah, morning. Well, I think the first thing to say, actually, the size of this debt is peanuts. It's $15 million, right? This is an outstanding debt that Syria has had to the World Bank for a really long time, since before the conflict kicked off. But it's basically meant that Syria has not been able, or would not be able if it wasn't paid off, to access the World Bank's financial support, but also its technical support, which is really, really crucial, because there's two areas in which Syria is just absolutely desperate for financial help. One of those is rebuilding the country. There's been no sort of full accounting of how much it's going to cost. The last time the UN looked at this was back in 2017. At that time, they said $250 billion they estimated for reconstruction. Now estimates are somewhere at $400 billion. So that's a huge amount of money. But also public sector, the pay of the public sector. And actually, before Qatar and Saudi Arabia decided to pay off this debt to open the way for Syria to be able to apply again to the World Bank, Qatar was mulling actually directly paying public sector salaries. In the end, it decided not to. That's because of the sanctions, the US sanctions that are still on Syria. But I think, just the really small size of this debt just makes it clear what a hole Syria is in at the moment. And the problem for them is the absolute lack of foreign currency in the central bank. We know that a huge amount of gold, of currency, was stolen from the country when Assad fled back in December. We now know, thanks to Reuters, who did an investigation, a lot of that was taken to Abu Dhabi on a private jet. But really, that's the main issue that Syria is grappling with. It's incredible to think it's nearly 6 months now since Bashar al-Assad fled, and still the government is grappling with this very basic problem. There are still sanctions on the country, although they are starting to be lifted. And it's just really a question of getting that foreign currency, that hard foreign currency, into the country.
This payment opens the door for cooperation between regional partners. Wonder what it tells us about the evolving dynamics in the Middle East, particularly with Syria's new leadership.
Yeah, well, this is the other astounding part of this news. I mean, first of all, having a joint statement coming from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. If we think back 10 years ago, these two countries, I mean, Saudi Arabia was enforcing trade blockades on Qatar. They were completely ideologically opposed. Qatar has always backed the Syrian opposition back when Assad was still in power, particularly parts of it that were close to the Muslim Brotherhood, and Saudi Arabia was absolutely opposed to that. But since Bashar al-Assad fled, we've seen Ahmed al-Sharaa, the new president, really doing this outreach in the Gulf. I think there's an awareness in Syria that, US aid has been frozen. It's almost certain that that's not coming back. More broadly, the US is kind of backing out of its role in Syria. Europe is completely, preoccupied with what's going on in Ukraine. And so, through necessity, the new Syria is looking towards other allies, so particularly in the Gulf and also in Turkey. And we've seen Sharaa making several trips to the Gulf region.
From your trip to Syria, I wonder what you observed about the state of the country today and how this kind of financial backing would fit into the larger picture of recovery and rebuilding.
Yeah, I mean, across the board, everybody was saying, the main thing is the biggest problem that's hampering Syria now is the sanctions. It made doing business near impossible. There's some very inventive businessmen who kind of came up with, ways of continuing to trade, setting up operations in Jordan or in Egypt. But really, if all that kind of industry, business, talent, creativity is going to come back to Syria, those sanctions need to be lifted. Because when I visited in February in Damascus, there were, for example, about 2 hours of grid electricity a day. Even the simplest things, people were having to sort of plan their lives around when they're going to take a shower. This is no way to run a country in the 21st century. Now, that's improved somewhat. Last month, Qatar started supplying gas to Syria through Jordan, and people on the ground there are saying, it's massively improved the situation. Now there's about 8 to 10 hours of electricity a day. But, until those sanctions are lifted and until Syria can start kind of trading as a normal country and applying to international institutions as a normal country, then really it's going to be stymied in whatever it tries to do.
And how close are we to the US and the EU actually easing those sanctions?
It's going bit by bit. I think, the US we saw the lifting of some humanitarian sanctions for humanitarian reasons back in January, but nothing else since then. The EU's started to lift sanctions. The UK also lifted a raft of more sanctions just last week against various government ministries and media outlets. So I think in Europe, which of course, also is geographically closer to Syria, could at some point be a trading partner to Syria. There is this awareness, I think, more than there is in America, of the need to kind of get the economy going again. But it is slow moving. And, not unsurprisingly, there are reservations about this new government, not least because, back in late February, there were these awful revenge attacks against Alawite communities in the coastal regions. So I think there's been a lot of kind of wait and see. But at some point, these sanctions do have to be lifted, because otherwise we're going to have Syria falling into a situation a bit like Afghanistan, completely just not being part of the world economy.
Thank you very much indeed. That was Monocle's Hannah Lucinda Smith there from Istanbul. And you can read the full report from her trip to Syria in the May issue of Monocle magazine, which is on all good newsstands now. This is The Globalist.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS, we query every aspect of the market, working with specialized experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
It's time to talk climate now with Sheena Rossiter, Monocle's contributing editor, who joins us on the line from Edmonton. Sheena, it's been a really exciting week in Canada. Obviously, the poll is now over. The Liberals, led by Mark Carney, are in. Where does the newly elected government stand on climate?
Yeah, it's really interesting because during the short campaign period, this was relatively glossed over. But now that there is an elected government, the Liberals have come out of this election just slightly shy of a majority government. They have 269 seats where, they have 169 seats where they required 172 to get that majority government. So it will be a little bit trickier to pass bills because they're going to need support from some members from the House that are in other parties. But before we look forward, let's just look a little bit backwards kind of at what the Liberal policy has looked at in the past 10 years or so. So in 2015, when the Trudeau government won its first majority, that's when the Liberal Party really started to implement sweeping changes with climate policy. And they put in things like carbon pollution prices system and regulations on restricting methane, for example. And then under the Trudeau minority governments that came after, Canada's sustainable job law came into fruition under that agreement when they partnered with the NDP. And that's when they started to create more jobs that kind of look at a low carbon economy and have this just transition. But that took a really long time to come into effect because of the minority government. And it was ultimately only passed in 2024 with much opposition from the Conservatives. So Mark Carney himself does have a long track record when it comes to being an international champion for climate change, but he's going to have to balance this priority while trying to maintain growth in Canada while fending off the tariffs. So this includes creating calls for an energy corridor between the provinces and looking to build critical infrastructure. And he's also looking to create critical projects that are going to be building up energy in the Arctic, where the Liberals are also hoping to beef up security as well.
Now, Canada, of course, has a lot of vast green spaces. What's been done to protect those under this new government?
Yeah, wildfires are really becoming a big issue across the country, but especially particularly in the West. And last summer, there was devastating wildfires here in Alberta that ravaged Jasper National Park. So one of the party promises in the election campaign, and part of the platform is to improve Parks Canada's disaster response to things like wildfires. And this includes everything from training and equipment to wildfire response teams, to also helping improve evacuation and building codes, getting those improved on new buildings once they get put up and things like that. So the Liberals have also said that they're looking to protect natural areas and helping mitigate both flood and other sorts of extreme weather. And they're going to look to do this through funding both conservation and also climate change policies through public and private infrastructure investments. So basically, in the past, what they're looking at doing is they're looking at creating at least 10 new national parks and marine conservation areas, as well as 15 urban parks across the country. But like I said, Carney's biggest challenge will be proving to voters that a former central banker can address these climate needs, but also get those big energy proposals through that Canada needs to build a stronger future.
Now, housing was a really big issue during the election. What's expected to be done to fix the current affordability crisis?
So the Liberals' housing plan, they're proposing what they like to call the Build Canada Homes to get the federal government back into the business of building homes, something that the federal government did post-war. So they're looking at injecting 25 billion Canadian dollars into financing and basically fabricating homes here in Canada to kind of get the manufacturing sector back up to speed as well. And providing, through that, they're looking at providing $10 billion in low-cost financing to create affordable homes to home builders. So they really do have to get a lot of homes built really quickly, and they also have to do that through cutting red tape in municipalities. So they have certainly a lot of work to do and not a lot of time to do it in, because there is quite a housing shortage here and affordability crisis happening. So one potential that they're going to have to look at is, what do homes look like in Canada? People aren't likely going to have that white picket fence single family home, but more likely to have a sort of different products where it's looking at like a row house or something in a form of housing.
Sheena, thank you very much indeed. That's Sheena Rossiter in Edmonton. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's show, Shanti Harmain is an Indonesian film producer based in Jakarta. She's been in the industry for more than 25 years and is currently the co-chief executive of Base Entertainment, a Jakarta and Singapore-based film studio with a focus on development, financing, production and distribution. She spoke at Monocle's Chiefs Conference in Jakarta with our two Asia editors, Fiona Wilson and James Chambers. Fiona began by asking her about the current state of the film industry in Indonesia.
It is a very good time in making films in Indonesia. It might be the golden time for Indonesian cinema. When I started 25 years ago, there's only 1 or 2 Indonesian films every 2 years. So all the screens are filled with Hollywood movies. We only had 900 screens for 200 million people. So flash forward now, we have 2,500 screens. Basically, we have 146 films released per year and 285 films produced per year. And the Indonesian film holds almost 70% of the market share. So it's a huge leap, basically, from 25 years ago.
And we just had the Eid holidays in Indonesia, the end of Ramadan. It's the it's the big time for people to go to the cinema in Indonesia. For our non-Indonesian audience, can you give us a flavor of the films that were out, which films did well, what people are going to see?
Yeah. So Eid holiday, maybe similar in the Western countries, like maybe Thanksgiving or Christmas, or in China, if you go like Chunjie, or you go to see your family. It's a long holiday. It's a 2-week holiday, maybe even more. And after all the family duties, you go watch films in the cinema together. And I have to say, this year, Eid celebration, which was 2 weeks ago, actually represents what's really good in the film industry right now. Basically, we have 5 films competing. It's all Indonesian films. 5 films competing with each other for this, like all the screens. And then the diversity of films, we have 2 horror films. As anybody from Southeast Asia knows, that Southeast Asian loves horror films, and so does Indonesians. 2 horror films, 1 family animated film, 1 is like a sexy drama, and then 1 is a love story. And we see how this film progresses, and it shows the high interest or demand from the audience. So out of the 5 films, 4 basically reach the box office benchmark. I mean, out of 5, 4. And then 1 right now, this is a talk of town. There's this animated film called Jumbo that basically is breaking records because none of Indonesian animated film has become a box office hit. And now it's already hitting, like breaking all records. It's going to become maybe top 5 highest grossing film of all time. And it beat Frozen 2, basically. Yeah, that's how big it is. Yeah.
I mean, how are you persuading people into the cinema? In other markets, cinemas sort of struggling in some places. How come here more people are coming into the cinema?
I think this started in 2016. I think the government, as you can see, I mean, I've been in industry for a long time, and we have seen like, we're going to be the emerging market. And no. So there's so many stops of like almost. We're the country of almost there, but we never arrive. But until 2016, I think the government did a really good policy of basically allowing foreign direct investment in the film industry, because before it was part of the negative list. And then because of that, then the exhibitors get extra funding, extra investment, and then they start building screens. But that also coincides with the population, the young audience. I mean, the audience of cinema is young, and you can see how the portfolio of the demographics of Indonesia is 50%, maybe young people. Number 2, the economy is also doing not bad. So those 3 elements sort of meet up, but now it has taken even further when there's trust. Before, Indonesian film, should I watch? Like people will always ask, like, should I watch this? You don't have trust of the quality, but now the quality is increasing because we have really talented filmmakers, top filmmakers. And also another element is the young audience would like to see themselves on the screen. They want to see their troubles, their concerns, and that is being met by the filmmakers. We don't just make horror films. We do also, there's one film right now, it's a genre film, but basically addressing issue of our dark history, racial tension, but it's not sugarcoated. You go head on, and it's doing well in the cinema. So there's political film, there's social commentary.
Can you sell Indonesian films abroad? Is there much of a market?
I think it's still a challenge, like many other films as well. I think right now what can be sold to other markets is genre film, is either action or horror. Indonesian horror is right now famous because it's a combination of local stories, and then also there's universality. Also in Thailand is very strong in horror market. So only that. But I think the presence of Netflix, and the presence of international platform will push, promote, these are Indonesian films. We did a series called Cigarette Girl on Netflix. It's the first Netflix original series from Indonesia. And I think that was, we're trying to give a little bit of, what Indonesian stories are like to the world.
And that was Indonesian film producer Shanti Harmain there, speaking with Monocle's Fiona Wilson and James Chambers at Monocle's The Chiefs Conference, which was held in Jakarta last week. And we can already announce that the next annual Chiefs Conference will be in Barcelona. So that's all for today's programme. Thanks very much to our producers Chris Chermack and Carlotta Rebello, our researcher Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager Elliot Greenfield. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and The Briefing is live at midday in London. The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. And if you want some listening in between, don't forget to visit our brand new website. It's just been redesigned. It's completely fabulous. And there you'll also find the full archive of Monocle Radio, so you can choose any programme from the past and re-listen to it. And I would just recommend Jenny Mustard on Meet the Writers, which was broadcast for the first time on Sunday. She is a Swedish author, and it's a great listen. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.